Welcome to the podcast, Rubye Del. I am so excited to have this opportunity to really tell your story and inspire a lot of the ladies in our region. You and I know each other very well. I definitely consider you as a trailblazer in our community and look up to you. And we have had many conversations about different things and your advice. And this is really exciting for me to be here with you today and have the ability to share it with the world, so to speak.
Well, thank you, Albine.
Before we jump in, some people may or may not know what you do, but before we get to all of that, let's start off by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you ended up in Tupelo, just a little bit of background about you before we dive into all of your businesses and the things that you currently do.
Well, I grew up in Fulton. It was a wonderful place to grow up. Very safe. Back in those days, you could run around all over town, all over your neighborhood. Nobody ever gave another thought to where you were unless you didn't show up for dinner. And then they'd start looking for you. And usually by calling a neighbor and saying, "Is Rubye over there eating supper?" So I was blessed to grow up in that neighborhood. During my growing up years, I spent a lot of time working for my daddy, who owned the newspaper in town. It was the Itawamba County Times. But my lifelong dream at that time, lifelong was a very short period of life, I wanted to be a band director. So I went to college to become a band director, and I did. As life has it, at one point I was unable to get a band job. We had moved to, my husband and I had moved to a different state, Alabama, and he had a really good job, and we had made a deal: whoever gets the best job first, that's where we'll go, assuming the other person could get a job. Well, I got there and I kept pounding the pavement, and there weren't any band jobs open, so I was looking for any kind of job. And I had gotten my master's degree at the University of Southern Mississippi, and I'd gotten it in guidance and counseling, because all of the kids in my band seemed to need as much counseling as they did music lessons. So I thought that would be very interesting, and I'd always been kind of interested in that field, but I hadn't planned to use it particularly. Well, there was a new community college in Andalusia, Alabama, where we were, and I got a call from the president of the college saying that he had a job open for me if I wanted it. And I didn't much care what it was. I wanted it. I needed a job. So I got a job at the college teaching psychology and sociology, which I told him, I said, "Well, that's not what my degree is." He says, "Well, it's related. If you keep going to summer school in that area, and if you like it, we like you, you can do that." So I actually stayed there for 8 years, loved my time there. It was fabulous, got involved in all sorts of things there, started a local arts council. We had all sorts of festivals. I was Student Government Association advisor. I did all of those things. So it was a very exciting, vibrant time in my life, and I would have never imagined that career path. But I learned a lot, learned a lot of really good stuff that stood me in good stead later on in my life. My father died in 1977, and I left the college and came back to Fulton to operate our family newspaper. Had no knowledge about business at that time, but I had great folks there who really loved the town. They loved the paper. They'd been working there a long time. They knew what they were doing, and they taught me. They took care of things, and as we went along, I learned, and like everybody wanted me to succeed. They wanted the newspaper to stay in the family. And so my major career was at the Itawamba County Times as owner, publisher, and editor of that newspaper. I was there for 35 years. So that is really my major career in my life, ended up being in the newspaper business. In right around 2004, 2005, I had become the general manager of the community newspaper group for the Daily Journal. And eventually sold the Journal, my paper, the Ottumwa County Times, and left that position to run my printing company, SprintPrint. Um, and I started doing that, but I had great managers there who had been running it. I'd started that business in the 1988. And so this was like 15 years later, and the people that had been running it for me were doing a great job. So, they liked me being around, but I didn't have to go. They didn't want me to come in and run it because they were already running it. So I had a lot of free time, so I started a hobby. It's the first time I'd ever had time to have a hobby, so I started ballroom dancing, which led to someone coming to Tupelo to teach us ballroom dancing, starting a dance studio, and then they left, and I kind of inherited the dance studio. I'm kind of an anomaly in the ballroom dance studio community in that most of the people who own dance studios are professional dancers. I am not. I'm an amateur dancer who just happened to know how to run a business, and I know how to hire people who are really good at their jobs. So fortunately, I found great people who manage that business for me. So that's kind of led me to move to Tupelo, of course, when I sold my paper, and because the SprintPrint was here, which is my printing company, and then stayed here, and then so now I still have, and there's lots of other trails we could go down of things that I've done and businesses I've been affiliated with or started or sold or whatever, or run for someone else, but that's the nitty gritty history of what has brought me to right now and what I'm currently doing.
You did that so eloquently because it's so much more, and the way you summarize that is just amazing. I have some follow-up questions because I know the
Great.
stories. Talk to me about what your father used to have you do when you were younger, before you even would consider work. Like, you already kind of were working in the newspaper business before you came back home to take over. Give our listeners a little snippet of what he used to have you do.
Well, whatever I needed to do, whatever was needed to be done, he wanted me to do it. He was very adamant about the fact that if I was going to be respected by the people who worked there, this is when I was a teenager or preteens. I started working for him after school and in the summers when I was in the 7th grade. So I grew up at the newspaper office. And he wanted me to learn everything everybody did, particularly the things in the back shop where we mailed the papers, collated the papers, did all of the commercial printing jobs and all of that. And he always told me that I had to work as hard or harder than anybody else back there, because if I didn't, they would not respect me, and they would think that, oh, well, she gets whatever she wants. She can do whatever she wants because she's the boss's daughter. And he says, you don't ever want anyone to say that you didn't earn every bit of their respect because you worked just as hard as they did. So that's one of the things that he was very adamant about. And so, being a kid and a little bit of a smart aleck at times, I said, well, what if we're caught up? You know, what if we're caught up and there's nothing to do? He said, grab a broom. He said, if I ever walk through the shop and you're not working, I won't be able to keep you here, because we're not going to ever let anyone think you got special favors.
I love that, Rubye Del. And you had already said that when you came home, it was a somewhat easy transition because the people there already knew you, they were running it. It sounds so simple, but people are a major part of any business. And so you had already built the groundwork because your father had kind of instilled that in you. And so you already had all those relationships. So you almost, they respected you and knew you were going to do the work because they knew you could, and they trusted you. It's a trust thing. So you were able to step in, and they were able to continue doing what they needed to do because they already had that respect for you.
I feel like that is the case. And when I came back, I tried to model what Daddy had taught me back then. And I worked as hard as anybody else. No job was, if the floor needed swept, I would sweep it. If I needed to be in the back shop helping get the paper out mailed, taking papers somewhere, I would do it. I always tried to let them know that I respected them. I respected the job they were doing. I was willing to learn from them, but I also expected all of us to do a great job together. And
Mhm.
I would, I don't even know how to describe how wonderful it was. We just had a work ethic, positive culture there that was amazing. It was just amazing. And it wasn't just me, it was everybody. And I tell people, because I've got a lot of people who worked for me for many, many, many years. And I said, well, people either work for me for a lot of years or not very long at all. Because when they would get a job there, if they would see how hard we worked. And I didn't usually have to get rid of anybody because if they didn't want to work that hard and they didn't want to be on that team, they didn't stay very long. I had so many growth opportunities, learned so much, not because we did things right all the time, because we were learning. We didn't know what the best practices were necessarily, but everybody was so gung ho. We made it our jobs to figure that out, and we would get consultants, and we would find out, well, what do we need to do to be better? Like, for one of the things I did that I was pretty proud of, that was we wanted the newspaper to win awards, because not for the awards, but because if you're an award-winning paper, that means you are serving the people better. Because the awards were based on the quality of what you produce, the quality of the news writing, the quality of the photographs, the quality of the layout and design, the quality of the community service. So that's why you went for the awards, not to have an award, but to show that you were doing what you were supposed to do. So I knew that we could be better, so I subscribed to the papers that won national awards, and in our circulation category and one category higher, and we studied those papers, and then we tried to say, oh, that's what they're doing, that's how they're doing that. And we also brought in consultants to help us, and our goal was just for continuous quality improvement, striving for excellence, and everybody knew that everybody on the team they were all in, and if they weren't all in, they didn't stay very long. But I would say that my other story that you may remember is, I think one of the most valuable lessons my daddy ever taught me was the meaning of community. And I was probably 13 or 14, and I was up front answering the phone on Wednesday night, because that's the night the paper was, we published the paper on Wednesday. And if we were late for some reason, you never knew exactly what time the paper would be out. Is the paper out yet? And back in the day, everybody couldn't wait to get their newspaper. And so someone would man the phones, and because people would be calling to ask when the paper would be ready. And one time I was the person that was working the phones, and I hung up the phone, and my daddy was walking behind me, and I said, Daddy, that just makes me so mad. And he said, what are you talking about? And they said, when's my paper going to be ready? I said, don't they know that's your paper? Yeah. And he said, young lady, the day it becomes my paper is the day we should shut the doors. He says, this is a community newspaper, and our goal is for everyone in this community to know it's their paper.
Wow.
And I've always felt like that I tried to use that in all of my dealings, whatever I worked on, whether it was what I do now with our All-Star Dance Camp, which we started 17 years ago. I want the campers to know, not to feel like, but to know it's their camp. They've got input. It's their camp. That's where they go for their vacation, to their camp. And I think when we lose that, you've lost what you're working for, at least for me. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not everybody's calling, not everybody's mission, not what everybody needs to do even. But for me, if it's not about community and bringing people together and creating win-win and having everybody love and care about each other, and then I'm not really interested in participating.
I love that, Rubye Del. Thank you for sharing. Your father wasn't the only one who instilled your love for community. Tell us a little bit about your mom and all of her accomplishments and what she instilled with you from her beliefs and her, values.
I think sometimes mother doesn't get enough credit, but she was an amazing, truly amazing woman. She and Daddy both grew up really poor. When you hear the term dirt poor, you're like, you have zero, you have nothing. I would love sometime to tell the stories about their humble beginnings, and I know that because they never had anything and they worked for everything they had, it made them appreciate what they did have a lot more, and it also instilled in them the work ethic that they had and the values that they had. But Mother did go to college, and that was a real major accomplishment that she got a college degree. She had to get it in 3 years because they didn't have enough money for her to go 4 years, and she went in the height of the Depression. Um, my, it's a real interesting story, but however, she made it her point, and my grandmother, her mother, made it her point that Mother would become an educated person because they valued education. They also saw education as a way out of poverty. At that time, you didn't think of a profession for a woman except pretty much school teaching. So Mother was to become an educated woman with a college degree and become a school teacher. Well, when we moved to Fulton, she was very upset that there was no library. And she told Daddy, Delmas, it's not okay with me to live in a community that does not have a library. And Daddy says, well, I guess you'll have to start one. And she did. And she taught us that if things are not as you would like for them to be, you do something to change it. She was very much the kind of person who did not sit on the couch, not sit in a rocking chair, whining or complaining about what they were doing or what they were not doing. She was like, we are they. If you're going to if you want something, do something about it, or don't whine about it. And so she was very much an activist in that way. In her community, she was very active in all sorts of things that were for the betterment of the community, but the library was her main claim to fame. And I've always tried to model that in that if I look around and I say, oh, I would like to do blah, 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 like the ballroom dancing, I really attribute the fact that we have ballroom dancing in Tupelo to my mother. For one thing, at her 80th birthday party, we were sitting out, it was at the Jamie Whitten Center over in Fulton. We were sitting out on the deck after everyone had gone except for my best friend Mona, myself, and my mom. And something came up about dancing. And I was not allowed to take dancing when I was a little kid, which I whined about all the time. But my grandmother thought it was a sin because she was raised very fundamentalist. And so I didn't get to take dancing. And I said something about the fact that, well, I didn't get to take dancing. I was just being, silly at the time. I wasn't really, I don't even remember the context. But my mother said, I wish you would quit complaining about it and sign up for ballroom dance lessons. No, sign up for dance classes. She didn't say ballroom, she said dance classes. And Mona said, yeah, I agree with your mother. I think you should learn to dance. And so I thought, well, okay, I guess I could. I'm a grown woman now. I can go learn to dance if I want to. Well, I started trying to think, well, what would I do? I'm too old to go take kiddie ballet or anything like that. And so Mona called me about 2 weeks later and she says, I've figured it out. Ballroom dancing, that would be the thing you should do, because adults do that, and that's a skill that you can carry throughout your entire life. It's really fun. It's a great social outlet. I think you would like ballroom dancing. So I said, okay. So I was on an airplane coming back from somewhere, and I sat by a lady that was in charge of the cotillion. And I said, well, do you teach the kids dancing? And she says, yes, we have someone that comes in and teaches them to waltz. And I said, well, who is it? Because I want to learn to waltz. And then I finally got in touch with someone, and the rest is history. I started learning to dance, and I found it to be just a wonderful hobby. And I thought, this is really cool. And then we found, I think it were 12 of us that we got kind of a little group and started learning to dance. And then we started the Tupelo Ballroom Dance Club. And then I had given myself a birthday present. In Las Vegas, I was out there on a business trip, and I decided that I would give myself a birthday present, take a dance lesson at a real dance studio. And I went there and I took this dance lesson and really liked the person. Subsequently met some people who went to that studio, subsequently went to a competition. And with those people, there were about 20 people, but there were 3 of us that were in our late 50s. And we became best friends, and I started flying to Vegas and taking dance lessons sometimes, occasionally. And so Ted Black was the guy who was president of the Ballroom Dance Club, the first president. And he says, how much does it cost to fly to Vegas? And I said, oh, it's about $400. And he said, how much does it cost to fly from Vegas to Tupelo? And I said, Ted, it's the same. He says, well, why don't we bring your teacher out here and we can all learn? And that's how we started having a dance pro come to Tupelo. And then one thing led to another, and then we had a dance pro who came to stay for 6 months, and he ended up staying for 2 years. And he's the one that started the studio. And when he left, Robbie Greenwood and Stephanie Betts were working for him. And they came to me and said, we love it here. We love our students. We do not want to leave. You own businesses. You know how to do all of that business stuff. We don't want to fool with business stuff, but we want to teach here. Why don't you own the studio and we'll work for you? And I said, okay, but I'm not going to be the manager because I don't have time. I've got too many other things. And they said, well, Robbie said, well, I don't think I'd make a very good manager. And Stephanie said, oh, I'll do it. So Stephanie Betts was the first manager that we had after I owned the studio. So that was about 15 years ago, and we've been dancing ever since.
Oh, what a story. I love it so much. And Tammy is your current manager.
Tammy is amazing. She is fabulous. Been with me 12 years now.
You have an amazing team, and you have a lot of dancers over there. Your staff over there has grown tremendously, and you give back to the community with the Boys and Girls Club. That's one of your ways of giving back to the community, and also sharing your love for dance, right? It's a twofold thing for you, so it really feeds your soul. And then you do Dancing with the King, which is another one of your community service type of event where you help raise money and provide dancing opportunities for students in our area. And you have a school program, I believe.
We do.
So there are just so many things. And I think you've even expanded, right? And we now have Singing with the King.
We have Singing with the King. And so we use some of the scholarship money that we raised through Dancing with the King to promote vocal music education scholarships as well.
Is that a partnership with the Elvis
with
fan
the Tupelo
club?
Elvis fan club?
Yes.
And as is Dancing with the King.
Fantastic. I want to go back to something. I have had the privilege of taking one of your success skills courses. And I know in my professional development, especially as a young woman, whenever we first met, I don't even know. I know it's been at least a decade, which is amazing to even say that. It was always very impactful and something very meaningful and very helpful and for me on my journey. I know that you started that program when you were back at the community college when you were
Mm-hmm.
involved. Tell our listeners that story of how that came to be and how you had that opportunity and how it evolved and how you started sharing it with the community.
Well, I was, as I said earlier, was charged to teach the psychology and sociology. And the Dean of Instruction wanted me to develop a course for personal development. It was a psychology course, and just based on how to understand yourself better and how to develop your own self better and so on and so forth. Well, there really wasn't a lot of guidance, but he kept saying, I want you to offer this course. Well, I got something just, I don't really believe that much in coincidences, but I got something in the mail about a workshop that was going to be held in Montgomery, Alabama. And all of the subject matter sounded very much like what I thought would be in a class like that. So I asked him if I could go. And he said, sure. So I went. Well, I thought, this is it. This is perfect. So I came back and I told the dean about it, and he said, well, it sounds great to me. He says, do you feel strongly enough about this that we could come down and have them do the workshop for a select group of our administrators and faculty? And I said, yes, I think it'd be great. So we brought the guy to Andalusia, and he did a workshop there, and everybody said, oh my gosh, this is fabulous. So we instituted a school-wide program where every person who came to the college had to participate in the Success Skills program. It wasn't called Success Skills then, but it was more Psychology of Personal Adjustment was the name of the course. And every faculty member got trained as a facilitator so that we could handle every student being in a group. And the purpose was to make sure that every student had close connections with at least 11 other students and one faculty member. And it was really amazing. I mean, just amazing. And the chairman of the math department decided we should do a study on it to find out if it was really as powerful as we thought it was. So one year we did a test group and a control group where the test group were the people who were participating and the control group were the people who were not, and it was random as to whether you took the course or not. And we found that we had a significantly higher grade point average and lower dropout rate with the people who took the class. So we verified and validated the fact that it was very powerful to help people develop and to have goals and to understand themselves and be just feel better about themselves and do better, and feel connected and a part of. So I just thought, man, this is great. But of course, when I came back to Fulton, I left that behind for a while, and then I got involved in community leadership programs. Started the first, along with some other people, it wasn't just me, we started the Leadership at Awamba, which was the first and longest running rural community leadership program in the state. And then I started working with other leadership programs. Well, when I moved to Tupelo, I was still involved somewhat with leadership training, but I wanted to do something specifically and initially for women, because I feel like that you can argue this either way, but I think women have a unique sense of skills and gifts, and women have a unique sense of responsibilities. And so their goals and direction very often is somewhat different. And I felt like that it was easier to talk about the struggles that women have in the workplace with women present rather than women and men present. So I thought, okay, what can I take from the Psychology of Personal Adjustment program and the leadership programs I've been doing. And I put together a program for women called Success Skills. And I have been told by many of the women who took that class that it had one of the biggest impacts on their lives positively than any other single thing they did for themselves. We eventually determined that we could handle all of the topics we needed to handle with men in the room. So we eventually made it co-ed, but there's probably 500 or more women who went through that program back when we were doing it 2 times a year.
That's amazing. So, Rubye Del, you have had a very successful career and you have had the opportunity to do a lot of amazing things. But through that, you've also had some challenges and experiences that, have really helped shape and mold you. One story that you have shared with me in the past was when you served on the board, on the newspaper association board for the state. And something had happened with the executive director there. And tell our listeners a little bit about that story. The reason I asked you to share that too is because I was very inspired by that. You went against the grain and you were very intentional in paving the way and ensuring that you do a very good job in ensuring that other women could follow in your footsteps. So please share that with our listeners.
Well, I was very flattered to have been invited to be on the board of directors of the Mississippi Press Association. I was the only woman on the board of directors, and I knew intuitively that how I did and how they viewed me was going to set the tone for women to come. So it was very important to me to give a lot of positive energy toward being sure that I was intentional about letting the guys see that it was wise to have me there, that I could contribute, and that I would do a good job. And so I just determined that I wasn't going to do anything in that boardroom or when I was with them I was just determined that I was going to represent women well, to show that we can do anything a guy can do as well or better. So I decided that rather than getting my feelings hurt about things like, all the guys would come up and they'd say, "Hey, Jim," and shake hands, and I'd come up and they'd like scuff their feet or whatever, because it was like, many years ago. And so they didn't know what to do with me. So I practiced handshaking and I practiced walking up to them and saying, "Hey, Bob," and they would go, "Oh, hey, Rubye Del," until they got accustomed to me being there, and it was natural for them. Like, how do you treat Rubye Del? I had to demonstrate how I wanted to be treated. And I learned that you can sit around, it goes back to Mother's thing. You can sit around and say, well, they should or they shouldn't or whatever, but you got to decide for yourself, this is how I want to be treated, and then you act that way. You got to act as if you have to create the expectations yourself instead of whining about it. And so I did. So a lot of cool things happened, but I think the story that you want me to tell is we had a lady who was the executive director who I adore. She's in her lifetime, she's accomplished a whole lot. She's really fabulous. But she was young. Of course, I was very young at the time. I was in my 30s. And she was as well. Maybe she might have even been younger than I'm not sure. But that's irrelevant. She made a presentation to the board of directors about window treatments. And we all, back in that day, probably would have thought of them as curtains, but she was on the up and coming there, and she was presenting what she wanted to do with window treatments. Well, unfortunately for her, the chairman of the board at that time was kind of a male chauvinist jerk. It is what it is. And he was very dismissive of her presentation and rude to her, really rude to her. It was not okay. But I knew it was a defining moment. Uh, anyway, she ran from the room crying. Well, I knew, I went, oh no, here we go. Every guy on that board turned around and looked at me like, are you going to go see about her? And I looked at the chairman and I says, well, that didn't go very well. What's next on the agenda? I thought, okay, it's not going to help her if I run into the bathroom and try to comfort her. So there's no point in doing that. And if I do, then it categorizes me as the little lady who's going to go take care of the people who are crying instead of one of the board members. So I just said, well, okay.
Moving on.
Moving on. What's next?
Oh, I love it. It
And-
is one of my favorite stories. I just feel like I learned so much from that, and sometimes we have to do something unexpected.
Yep. Well, I really think I defined myself and the role of the appropriate role of the woman who's on the board at that opportunity. And of course I got with the other lady later and told her I thought he was a jerk and I was really sorry. And she says, well, I'm glad you didn't come in here because it wouldn't have helped anything. She got it.
You made the right decision.
I made the right decision. She did not think for 1 minute that I should have jumped up from the board table and followed her out of the room. She didn't want me to. She was embarrassed. She just needed to go collect herself. But anyway, I thought that's one of my favorite stories because it's one time when I went like, yeah, I got it right.
Yeah. We don't always, do we?
We don't always.
But sometimes we do, and it's like, all right, I'm good. Let's shift gears just a little bit. You have had many successful businesses. What advice would you give to a woman who is looking to either start a business or pivoting in her career to do something she's always wanted to do?
Well, that's a tricky question. The first thing I would say is it's important to know what your dreams are. It's very important. If you're not happy, if you're not doing something you enjoy, figure out what you want to be doing and figure out a way to do that in some way. I really believe you should follow your heart, follow your dreams. But I also believe very strongly that you should know what you're doing. Don't quit your day job. Don't give up plan A until you've got plan B, because a lot of people will just throw up everything to do something that's a good idea, but they don't have the infrastructure, and then they go into debt and it doesn't work out. We all know that a high percentage of new businesses fail. And usually it's because they don't have the infrastructure that they need to be successful. And people who go into business, particularly if it's a small business and it's undercapitalized, tend to work in the business instead of on the business. In other words, they're actually doing the business instead of managing the business. And it's a recipe for disaster, because you've got to have you have to be able to sit back and look at what your business needs. I mean, legally and accounting and financing and marketing and all of those things that aren't the inside nut of the business, but they're the things that support the business. And most of the people don't have enough money to hire enough people to do that. And then one of the pitfalls is they start talking to their staff members about their issues. And then that goes downhill. And it's just really tough. It's really tough. So what I try to tell people is that while I am the queen of championing people who want to be entrepreneurial and start a business, I think that we have to be smart about it. We have to be really smart about it if we're going to do it. We have to analyze it. Now, some people would laugh and say, well, I'm one to just do things. Well, that's true. I am. I'm a doer. We know that. You and I have experienced that we have similar styles there. But there's a kind of a rule of thumb, and that is it's fine to just do something if it's something you can easily quit doing or it's not going to be all that expensive. But if you're talking about quitting a job where you have good benefits and good wages and starting something and you don't really have enough money or you haven't figured out all the angles on that, then that's when you got to slow down. You have to say, what's the percent of the possibility for success? And if it's not very high right now, how can I change that? How can I make it higher? And I usually discourage people because they'll come in fired up and I start asking questions like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought, no. And then I say, well, then I would say you should wait until you've got all that figured out before you jump ship from what you're doing now.
Great advice. That is solid advice and so true. We get excited, pie in the sky, we run towards it. But so many people, you have to pay the bill. So many people forget you have to pay the bills.
Right.
You have to take care of your family. And so a lot goes into that decision making. I'm curious, we have discussed many of your businesses. What are some businesses that you have done that you haven't shared yet, or maybe that people would be surprised that you have been a part of, or that I probably don't know? Because everything we discussed today I know about, but what do I not know?
Well, let's see. What you don't know, you don't know that I once was a part owner in Itawamba Die Cutting, which was a business that my daddy started and my sister and I inherited. And we owned that for years and years and years. Used to when you bought shirts and they were folded and they had cardboard in it.
Yes.
And it was cut a certain way. It was cut with a die. So it was cutting paper products in certain shapes to go into shirts, or there were various other things that we would cut paper in certain shapes. Usually it was some sort of cardboard or cardboard thickness, but it sometimes was other kind of paper. So we would create the dies and cut the paper. I didn't ever work there. I owned it. We had a guy that ran it for years and years and years for us, but we owned that company for many years. Then I started a newspaper in Hamilton, Alabama one time and sold that. I bought the Red Bay News and owned it for, gosh, I don't even know how long I owned the Red Bay News, but for a long time I loved owning that paper. I had a wonderful publisher that I put up there that just did a great job. I also owned the Baldwin News at one time and sold it to Jason Collum, and I also sold the Red Bay paper to him about 7 or 8 years ago. So I have had owned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 papers, in addition to the die cutting plant. And then SprintPrint I started back in the 80s because there wasn't a quick printer here in Tupelo. And it's been going since then, and I still own that. But the two businesses that I currently still own after all of those businesses, it's not that many in the grand scheme of things, but it seems like a lot looking back, are still going, is the dance studio and the SprintPrint. Oh, well, I forgot my consulting firm.
And you still have that, right?
I still have my consulting firm, which I'm happy to consult with people if they should want me to. But we really run our event planning out of this office now more than the consulting. But I used to do a lot of consulting with businesses and industry, and also chambers of commerce, that sort of thing. So just strategic planning, leadership programs, communication skills, exercises, training. Used to work for banks a lot, do customer service training and that sort of thing. So I've done phone training. I mean, you name it. At one time in my life, I probably thought it was a great idea and did it for a while and enjoyed it. I can't think of. Oh, the other thing that I did that you may not know is I taught elementary school one year in my
What
life.
age?
5th and 6th graders.
Oh, bless you. Was that a 1-year stint?
It was, but it was situational. I was in college, graduate school, and saw a sign saying advertising they were recruiting members of the National Teacher Corps. And it said, and this is back in the 70s. No, in the 60s. It was in the 60s. Late 60s. It said, get your tuition paid and earn $300 a month. Well, that was a big deal. So I went down to see what it was all about, and they said, well, you'd be a teacher's aide at a school. So this was before integration. So I was supposed to be a teacher's aide at Nora Davis Elementary School in Laurel, and it was an all-black school. But when I got there, they didn't have enough teachers, and they put me in a self-contained classroom for the first semester teaching 5th grade, which I was in no manner qualified to do, but I did it. I had a good time. I think the kids learned whatever they learned, but I mean, I followed the syllabus, and we had lessons, but it was wonderful. I had a great time, learned a lot. I got very interested in diversity and cultural. I mean, I just ended up going to, in my future graduate studies that I did above my master's, I studied a lot of race and ethnic relations because I got so intrigued after teaching at Nora Davis. And but the thing that I did there that which I'm most proud is I started a choral music program. So they didn't have any kind of choral music, so I started a course. The the superintendent said, well, you can do it if you want to, but I don't think anybody will come. You can offer it at recess. And I had 75 kids in my course. We were great. We were so good.
I think it was probably so fabulous. Kids just flocked to you, and you're a phenomenal teacher. So I'm not surprised at all that you brought something you love and you shared it with those students. And that's probably an experience they never would have had unless you were there. So I think that's awesome.
It was a unique experience for them and for me, but we rocked it. We had, I mean, if you're going to, most of the people who started the program with me, well, all of the people who started when I started quit, except for me. But Miss Harden didn't raise a quitter. I told them I'd do it for a year, and I did it for a year, and made it into a wonderful experience. And I learned a lot. I learned more than anyone else did from me that year, because I learned to appreciate and understand that truly something that I had not had been exposed to. Mm-hmm. I really had not been immersed into a different culture than my own, and didn't realize how different it was. And it was not better, not worse, it was just different. And it was fascinating. I was fascinated and enjoyed. I enjoyed most of it. There were a couple of people who weren't happy that I was there, like the 6th grade teacher who had to give up her self-contained classroom when the feds came in and said that I couldn't teach a classroom all by myself. I had to team teach. She did not want me to team teach with her. She wanted to do what she had always done for 35 years.
Oh, that's a funny story, Rubye Del. I love it. So, Rubye Del, how do you measure success?
I think success should be measured differently for every person. Some people have these Like a person should be able to do blah, 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 blah. Well, that's just ridiculous. We're all different. And people constantly are talking about how they don't feel like they measure up. Well, what's their measure? What are they measuring by? It's, to me, we all need to understand who we are, what our values are, and what our goals are, what makes us happy. There's all sorts of things. There's little things that can make us happy and big things, and we need both of those things. If we don't stop to smell the roses, if I don't look for something to be happy about every day, then overall I'm going to be not happy. It can't just be the big peaks, but we love having those, but that can't be the only thing. So I think deciding how we want to travel, where we want to travel, and who we want to travel, with whom do we want to travel, and then doing that. That's, to me, success. If I create for myself, and I do believe we create our own realities, that is a real deep subject, and we could talk about it all day long, because you say, well, this is reality. Well, yes, that's true, but within that reality, who am I, and what do I want, and what do I want to give, and what do I think is important, and setting some standards for ourselves and some goals for ourselves, and then living those out. To me, real happiness is having integrity, and by integrity I mean is that I say what I mean what I say, and that what I do, what I say is reflected in what I do. I've got to be integrated. To me, being integrated in my action, my thoughts, and my words is what integrity is. And so if I make decisions based on my values and the things that I do, the people I do it with, that makes me happy, and I feel like I'm accomplishing whatever I've set out to accomplish, then I'm successful.
That is so true. We are measuring up against ourselves, right?
Right.
Not anyone else.
I'm not measured
and
against
it looks
you.
so different for everyone.
Right.
That is probably the best way I have ever heard it being put, and it's so true. So true. What are your future aspirations, Rubye Del?
Lord have mercy. Well, I would like to keep being able to dance because it brings me joy. I love doing our All-Star Dance Camp. It's one of my main passions is to provide that community. It's really an exciting thing for me. Is you go to a place and there's nothing there that relates to dance. You put in the dance floors and the people show up and they have a week of joy where they're learning and growing together and enjoying and supporting one another, making friends from people from all over the country. That's just the most exciting thing to me. I'm real excited about our Dance in the Schools program and the opportunities we're trying to give to young people to learn to dance because it is a lifelong skill. I love our Dancing with the King program. It's fun. It's fun to dance to Elvis's music and honor the cradle of rock and roll. We are the cradle of rock and roll, and without the rock and roll music, the dancing to rock and roll music wouldn't have started. And I think it's a great way to celebrate Elvis and his music and have some fun with our celebrity dancers who do the fundraising while raising the money for the kids to continue to learn to dance. So I just love the mission of Dancing with the King. And then I'm very proud to have been one of the initiators of Dance Like the Stars. Casey Caldwell Grist and I started that program many years ago, and it raises a substantial part of the Boys and Girls Club's budget each year. And to me, it is the most elegant, classy night. We've had judges who've been to a lot of places and judged a lot of things, and very well-known folks that have come in and said they've never seen one any better than ours. And most of them aren't nearly as good because it's classy. I mean, it's the classiest thing that we do. It's just very well done, and love working with Zell and Evie over at the Boys and Girls Club. They have brought so many additional things to the event to help it grow. And I could start naming names, but Tracy Proctor and his designs make it so elegant, and I mean it's just so joyful and rewarding to be a part of that.
It is one of my favorite events. It is fabulous. And you and the rest of the team do a tremendous job. I know it takes months of preparation, and y'all have it down pat. I know you have it down pat, but it's still a huge effort, and it's amazing to see it all come together. And it's so much fun.
It's fun.
So much fun. It is, like I said, one of my favorite events for
Well,
sure.
let me just say, I do want to say that it got so big that I was very grateful when Evie started taking on the part of organization of the ticket sales and the tables, so on. There's just so much to it, so much more to it than just the dancing. The dancing is huge, and I feel like we just have a great partnership, but I want to give her a lot of credit because she's really the coordinator of the event, and I am very happy and pleased to be the producer of the dance show, but it has been able to grow because of her leadership.
If you could tell one thing to your younger self, what advice would you give?
Well, this is one that makes me real emotional, but it would be to love myself, because I was very advanced in years before I started really working on loving myself. I don't know exactly why, but I felt like because my parents were such role models, not just for me, but for the entire community, and they were so smart, and they were so this, and they were so that, I always compared myself to them, and that's why I'm so adamant about success. We have to compare ourselves to ourselves. But my mother said something to me one time. I had said I was beating up on myself, which I was prone to do a lot back when I was younger. And I said, I'll never be as good as Daddy was. And she said, wait a minute. She says, if that's your goal, you're going to fail because you're comparing yourself to Delmas Harden. He was himself. She says, you can't be him. You got to be the best Rubye Del Harden you can be. And she said, there are a lot of things that you do as well or better than he does. There were some things that he did as well or better than you do. It's irrelevant and immaterial. You got to be your best self. She says, quit comparing yourself to your daddy and start comparing yourself to you and become the best Rubye Del Harden you can be. And that changed my life.
I think you paved the way. I mean, one of the leading ladies here in town, I would dare say. I mean, your story is amazing. I'm so inspired just sitting here, and I feel like I should get out that door and start doing more, and my mind is just racing. But it has been truly an honor and a privilege. It's extra special to have an opportunity to interview someone who I admire and look up to and think a lot of in this capacity, and then being the medium by which others also get to have that tiny little piece of you that maybe they too will be inspired, encouraged, and motivated to pursue whatever it is that they want to do. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for being here with me today, and thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
It's been a pleasure.